Hello, this is David Halen. You are now listening to the introduction of my story, Perfect Forgetfulness. I hope you enjoy.
Gaze. Raisa asked me with a disappointed sigh. I looked over at where she sat on the other side of the bed, sitting in a way where she was facing away from me. Yes? Love. Raisa looked over her shoulder at me, her longer hair catching on her shoulder as her face was turned towards me. She sighed again. Am I? I could feel my heart sink an inch when she said that. Are you what? I asked, but I already knew the answer. Her eyes went down to the middle of the bed, and she put her hand on her other elbow. Am I truly your love? She asked me softly and with trepidation. I put my book on my chest and directed my attention to Raisa, my wife. I sighed. It doesn't feel like it? I croaked. I guess it's habit. I added sadly. Raisa turned so she was sitting crisscross. She had her hand lingering on her chest, making her nightgown crease and ripple over the front of her upper body. Is that what we've turned into? She asked. She sounded like she wasn't only condemning me, but also herself. Are we habits to each other, Gaze? I shook my head. I put a bookmark in my book and sat up straighter so I could look my wife in the eyes at the level she was at. I couldn't make the words so easily. I let out another longer sigh and slowly, subtly nodded. Raisa looked off at one of the walls behind her. I could hear her sniffle. In the quiet room it was as loud as glass breaking on a blackboard. I thought about what to say. Are you okay is too rudimentary of a question, and it's obvious that she wasn't, neither of us were. Do you want to drink wine and bang is too juvenile of a question coming from a man in his 30s. Do you want to go for a walk might be a good proposal. It would be the last good proposal I would have given in a few years, so it feels like. I started to ask. Raisa looked at me through the mirror over our dresser. I could see her eyes through the lamplight from the dresser. I looked Raisa in the eyes. Do you want to get dressed and go for a walk? I asked her. Raisa shook her head. It's 3 a.m, Gaze. She explained. I looked at the clock on my nightstand for confirmation, 3:02 a.m. And, Raisa yawned, damn, there was a time where I found every quirk, every tick, every minute action from her beautiful, but now, I have the fondness of an old man looking across a cemetery. And we've hardly slept. I shook my head, my eyes still fixed on Raisa's eyes through the mirror. Yes or no, love? Both of us reacted in disappointment when I called her that again. Raisa shook her head. There was a glistening spot on her cheek. She stood up from the bed, turned off the lamp, and walked over to her side of the bed to my left and laid on top of the covers. She rested her head on her pillow and laid on her left side facing away from me. She didn't fall asleep. I could tell from the way she was breathing that she wasn't asleep. I let out a sigh. There's a pain in my heart. This is what we've become. Are we tired of each other? Have we gotten too used to each other? Did we go too fast? I don't know. I turned to my right and turned off my lamp and the darkness rushed into the space the light vacated from. I laid on my back looking up into the darkness. Why are we like this now? I said under my breath. I don't like it either. Raisa said quietly. Can we discuss it in the morning? I nodded knowing full well that she couldn't see me. Yes. There was a silence in between us for a few seconds that seemed to drag a little while longer than what was normally comfortable. Okay. I couldn't fall asleep. Raisa was able to sleep fast enough after we stopped talking that morning, but I was laying there with my eyes shut waiting to drift off. What are we doing? What made us look at each other like this? I don't despise her, but I don't adore her either, and, it hurts. It's like, we're just in each other's lives because we found each other here. We loved each other at first sight, but then what happened? How did we get to the way we are now? I sighed as I laid awake, What are we doing? Now I'm back where I started. I shook my head slowly. I looked over at the clock by my bed and it read 4 in the morning. Had I been thinking about us the whole time? And it's only been an hour? I could feel my eyes start to moisten with tears. I was thinking in circles as I was denied sleep by my thinking, everything coming back to where I began. I reluctantly got out of bed at 6 to make breakfast for Raisa and I, routine. I brewed coffee for myself and tea for her, routine. Raisa came out into the kitchen. "Good morning," she said to me with a tired tone in her voice, routine. "Good morning," I answered back with no different tone of my own. "Did you sleep at all last night?" I asked her. She shook her head. "You didn't either." I shook my head, routine. She didn't look at me as she was gathering words to say. "Let's talk about us after we eat." I nodded and continued to make breakfast for us, scrambled eggs and toast, routine, but somewhat of a new routine. Raisa grabbed her tea from the counter and sat at the table where her tablet was and began to read. I don't know what she reads, the news, a novel, some other article, routine. The eggs and toast were finished and I put everything on our plates and took them to the table where she was sitting, routine. Raisa continued to read on her tablet as she ate her breakfast, and I looked out the window as I ate mine, routine. The weather forecaster said it was supposed to rain this afternoon, but nothing too serious, no flooding, that's good. Raisa and I hardly looked at each other besides a few subtle, empty glances at each other, new routine. Raisa always finished eating first, and I finished eating a few minutes after she was finished, routine. I took out plates and she put her tablet away and waited for me to sit back down, scarce routine. We looked at each other, she had a tired look in her eyes, some from last night, some from the years of routine. Raisa sighed. "I miss us," she said weakly, "but I think both of us have been saying that bi-weekly." I nodded. "What have we tried?" she asked me in solemn despair. "Why doesn't this work?" I shrugged my shoulders, routine. She shook her head. Her words were breaking like our hearts. "We tried being foolish, and act young again, be intimate and sensual with each other," her words broke again. "But," she let out an almost gravel-like sigh. "That was like drying yourself off with a wet towel." I nodded, routine. She started to say. "I don't know what happened to us gays." She was stiff, I was stiff in a relaxed position on my chair. "I miss the young us." I let out a tired sigh, routine. Raisa nodded. I think," she shook her head. "What can we do? Do we want to go through the MBD process again?" I shrugged. "We've gone through it twice before." My voice felt dragged across a rough, stone ground. "2 different times before, that means we had come to a point where we had no other option but to go through the process 2 different times." Raisa nodded. "Nothing else has worked yet," she said defeated, routine. I nodded, routine. "They say that no one should go through the process more than 5 times, and we're at 2 now." She explained, but we both already knew this. She was debating about herself of the idea, is it cost-effective to go through this again? The process is free by itself for legal reasons, but that doesn't mean that there's a possibility that you might pay for something down the road. Have we already paid something because of how we've ended up? I don't know, routine. Maybe routine? I sat up straighter and looked into my wife's tired eyes. If we have nowhere else to turn by the end of the day, my voice spoke like I was in mourning. Then we will go in the morning, I explained to her. Raisa forced a smile for half a second before her tired, resting face returned to her expression. Okay. Her voice almost croaked as she said that. Let's go over to your brother's house this afternoon so we can fill out our journal, I proposed. Maybe this proposal is better than the proposal from earlier this morning. In case we decide to go into the process again. Raisa nodded. I feel sorry for him, she said flatly. I tilted my head at that. She glanced up at me and looked back down into a frown. Porter has seen our lives change from the process 2 times before. I continued to look at her. And, she looked up and straightened herself till we were eye to eye. You know we talk to each other often, she said. I nodded. She let out a half laugh. Hell. I talk to Porter more than my own husband. I let out a defeated, soft, weak groan on hearing that. Raisa nodded in a strange rhythm. He's seen our lives change over time, first a few years in our marriage, then snap back before we've somehow changed again in 4 months, and now, her voice felt deeper. It's only been 2 weeks since the last process we went through to try to save our marriage. She took in a deeper breath that seemed to shake as it was coming in. We swore him to secrecy against us so nothing would be tainted in our resets, she explained, but I knew, routine. But, before we go again, I want to ask him, where did we go wrong? I nodded. As long as you do the talking. I told her with a soft growl to my voice. Raisa nodded. I stood up and walked back to our living room. I let myself fall onto my couch and I was asleep instantly. Routine. I don't know when I stopped dreaming, maybe it was at a time when I found myself to not be ambitious anymore. When was that? I don't know. The last time I remembered having a dream I was in my early 20s, Raisa and I were dating, and every night I dreamed that we would spend the rest of our lives together. I wish I was living that dream, and I think she wishes that too. I woke up from my nocturnal nap and looked up at the clock on the wall, almost 10 in the morning. I sat up and rubbed my eyes to get whatever amount of sleep out of my eyes. I walked over to the other sitting room and saw Raisa writing out what she wanted to put in the journal. She was sitting in the darker half of the sitting room as the overcast sky slowly drained its precipitation payload outside, but the pad she was writing on illuminated her face. That may have been the first time in a long time that her face glowed like that, and it was assisted this time. I think I had better plan out what I wanted to write as well. I went over to the end table and got my tablet and its display began to glow in my hand. We have these journal entries so that if God forbid we go through the MBD process a 5th time, we'll translate the journal entries from whatever language we translated them into and, as a last effort to save our marriage, read the lessons we've learned from the past processes and avoid the detriments that we fell into before. It's not flawless, but we're working with what we have provided. I went to another part of the house and sat down on the floor. In front of me was the living room and to my left was a hallway. I felt comfortable sitting there. I don't know why, I don't think it's routine. I looked at the glowing tablet in my hands. The different applications on display in neat rows stared at me with no judgment. I swiped through a few pages before I got to the note page of the tablet. I guess I didn't think I would be using that program as often, so I put it at the end of all the pages of other apps and programs. So many useless programs that I can't get rid of, the system won't let me do so. I opened up the note application and took out the pen provided with the tablet, and I began to write. March 24, 2043. It's been only 2 weeks since Raisa and I went through the process, a shorter section of time than the attempt before. I think we placed the day we wanted to set our minds to on a bad day, not because we were miserable, but because we only had pleasure on our minds. I want to look back at the days following our wedding a few years ago and try to figure out what day is a better day for us to be set to. This time around was bad for us because for a week and a half we pursued pleasure between each other, night after night. I believe we burned each other out. The only thing on our minds is the idea of what we can do in bed, and in the fallout of this we have learned that this is not what we need to dwell on for now. We have broken gazes as we look at each other. We can look at each other in the eyes but we feel incomplete because we aren't completing each other the way we are needing to. I miss the time when Raisa and I loved each other, not out of routine, but out of devotion. There is a myriad of lessons that I've learned from this that I know I'll forget through the process. First, Love and lust are not the same thing. I lost the meaning of love the past few weeks, but I have full knowledge of this. Lust is never satisfied, and in the process of feeding lust I have found myself dry and tired looking for more venues to indulge myself. It's a useless pastime that takes more than it leaves behind. Raisa and I write short notes for each other that we put in our pockets before we go through the process, and the note that I'll put in each of ours will tell us that lust cannot take the place of love. Maybe I'll add that we should enjoy the company of each other more than the feeling of each other. I don't know if that means anything, but I feel like it would be a step towards keeping our marriage alive longer. Porter, if you ever read these, I want you to break your rule if we go past a certain exception. If Raisa is talking to you about us only going after the pleasure of each other, stop us and give us the sense we don't have. Thank you. I looked over past the living room and Raisa was reading again. She had finished what she must have finished what she wanted to write and translated the text to a different language. I stood up with enough trouble for it to be noticeable, but I made it to my feet soon enough. She looked up and we both nodded in agreement. Would you text your brother and tell him we're on our way? I asked Raisa, my voice still seeming to drag. She nodded and took her phone out to send the text. Porter lived about half an hour away from us out in the middle of the more rural area of the country. It's a longer drive for us to make, so in turn we do our best to make the most of each trip out there we take. Porter is a wonderful man and should get married. He would be a blessing to any woman. On the drive to Porter's I neglected to think. My mind was blank from the beginning of the drive until we reached Porter's. I simply believe that I had nothing to think about on the long drive. I looked out the window and enjoyed the scenery, a small thing that I've found myself to enjoy now. We were halfway to Porter's when I remembered that I hadn't changed the language of what I had written. Which language should I do this time? I think I had my entries be translated to Spanish and Latin, so German this time. I took my tablet out of the slot in the door and went to the note application and selected the option to translate the entire note to German. I looked the note over. I don't speak a word of German. It's perfect. By the time we reached Porter's house it was almost 1 in the afternoon. I guess I had spent a lot of time considering what I wanted to write. Porter was sitting on the porch on a bench reading a book. He held the book in his hands and rested his hands on his dog's head. The dog looked very content with where he was. Porter looked up from his book and a weak smile grew on his face amongst the new forming wrinkles fractaling from his eyes and cheekbones. The weak smile took a passive position on his face as his hazel eyes looked us over. You couldn't find another way? Porter asked us in a way that seemed like he already knew the answer. Raisa went ahead of me. She shook her head. No. The brother and sister hugged. Porter was 8 years older than Raisa, and it's obvious to see. Well, Porter began to say, his voice wasn't so deep that it dragged like mine, but it was deep enough to where if you were pressed against his chest you would feel a gentle rumbling with every word. Let me get your journal out, he said before inviting us inside. Come in. Raisa and Porter walked inside with arms over each other's shoulders and the husky, Brandon, followed close to Porter's side. You know, I wish you two would visit every other day, Porter said as he left Raisa and I in the living room as he went down the hall to get our journal. Maybe me talking to both of you at once would keep your marriage going. Porter opened a door in a farther part of the small house and we could hear the soft thumping of books and other things being moved as he was getting our journal. Maybe he was saying something burlesque under his breath, but we couldn't hear it. Porter came out of the hallway with our journal. It wasn't anything extravagant or remotely poor, it was simply a journal that we bought at a hobby store a year and a half ago. Porter gave Raisa the journal and she produced her tablet from her purse. It escapes me, Porter said with a mix of amazement and disappointment in his voice. That you two managed to erode your marriage away again, and this time it was because you two wouldn't stop. Raisa blushed and that was cue enough for Porter to stop, he sighed. Raisa opened the journal to the next empty page and put it on an end table. She went to the notes app on her tablet and projected the text she wrote onto the journal, lining up the words to fit on the page before pressing confirm, pasting the text onto the journal. She didn't write too much, nor too little, but I wrote more than she did. I had my tablet in hand and turned the page in the journal to the next empty page. I did the same actions with the tablet that Raisa had done and pasted my German letter into the journal's paper. I could feel an anticipation within myself of something. I wanted to place the feeling or where it was coming from, but I felt like I was being stopped from exploring the idea. "How soon are you two going to do it?" Porter asked as he took the journal from the table and looked over Raisa and I's notes. Porter could read the translated notes as well as Raisa and I, and that was the main idea of this, that this be a last resort just in case all else fails. I nodded. "Yes." Raisa answered her brother. "You two seem so drawn to it." I sounded like Porter's words were being dragged out, but that could easily be my fatigue getting in the way of my perceptions. Almost like the process is some miracle drug that can fix anything, my perception of his words again. "Or, you think it does?" Porter was looking through the new notes. He was taking in every word like he was reading it normally, but we all knew that he couldn't. Porter turned the page to what I wrote and he didn't say anything as he looked at my page. After a minute or two he looked up at me and closed the journal. "Interesting." Porter put the book under his arm and looked at the two of us and took a longer breath before speaking. "I hope you two get what you're looking for," and, Porter looked down at Brandon and rubbed his ears then looked back up at us. "And I hope you never have to find it again." I nodded. "We hope so too," Raisa said with a small spark of hope in her voice. Porter turned around and walked back down the hall with Brandon at his heel. Porter took a glance over his shoulder and the look in his eyes echoed everything he hoped for us. Porter walked the rest of the way down the hall and Raisa and I went out of the house and to our car. The drive back went faster than the drive there, but this time Porter's words echoed in my head. "I hope you find what you're looking for, and I hope you never have to find it again." "I hope you find what you're looking for, and I hope you never have to find it again," over and over it echoed. I guess it's a rally cry of sorts. If an entire city were chanting this single phrase to some corrupt politician it wouldn't make too much sense, but it makes sense to Raisa and I. I looked over at Raisa driving and her brother's words echoed again. "I hope you find what you're looking for, and I hope you never have to find it again." I sighed. I hope so as well. We didn't go home before going to the MBD center. The people who started the MBD program suggests that you don't have too much in your stomach before going through the process due to complications when you emerge into your old self. That's a strange way to say that, but it feels close enough to what the process does. After we reached the main city proper, we went to the MBD center that's closest to our house. Raisa put the car in the parking lot and turned on the valet option to send the car back to our house. We walked in. The display above the reception desk said that there were 12 terminals available. It's good to see that most people in this area are having good lives at the least. Raisa and I went up to the reception desk and the younger lady asked us the questions we have heard before. "Is this your first time going through the mind and body displacement process?" she asked with a routine sound in her voice. "No," Raisa answered. "How many times have you gone through the process before?" "Twice." The receptionist's eyes widened a fraction at the sound of that, but her voice sounded unfazed. "How old are the parties in question?" Raisa gestured towards me. 31, and 27. The receptionist nodded almost sagely. "It is a rainy day outside with a chance of lightning. You do recognize the fact that should lightning be present as you're in the process there may be terminal damage to your psychology." Raisa and I looked at each other, but we had already made the choice. "Yes." "Do you still intend to go through the MBD process today?" "Yes." "Do either of you have any medical history concerning mental health at any point in your lives?" "No." The receptionist typed on her keyboard for a few more seconds before she moved backwards in her chair to catch our ticket as it printed. She then rolled her chair back to her desk and wrote her signature on it before giving the ticket to us. "Would both of you sign on either line provided on the ticket and you will go to the terminal indicated on the ticket and the terminal administrator at that station will give you further instructions." I took the pen that was on our raised part of the desk and signed my name on one of the lines. I then gave the pen to Raisa and she signed on the second line. We walked into the hall, if you could call it a hall. It was more of a corridor with high ceilings with cold lit chandeliers hanging from the ceiling providing half of the light in the hall. The rest of the light was being illuminated by the active terminals spinning and glowing as the gyros and rings moved smoothly in circuits and rotations and motions as if they were leaves on the surface of a pond. The terminals glowed a white light that seemed to have some other color glowing from within, but I can't seem to place what color it was. I see it as some kind of brown or maybe an ugly blue, but Raisa always says it's red. I don't think I can see that color. Each terminal was about 25 feet across from one end of each sphere to the other, made up of gray and silver rings arranged in a way that resembled a mechanical eyeball. Each terminal was separated from the hall by a gate, and to the left of each gate was a booth where the terminal administrators stood waiting for people with tickets to come in, or they were monitoring the process of their terminals while someone or a group of people were inside a terminal. Our ticket read that we were to go to terminal number 8, that one was on our left closer to the end of the hall. We walked down the hall to the terminal and met the administrator running terminal number 8, who was an older looking man wearing a steel blue 3-piece suit. The jacket of the suit looked like it had scales like a snake as the texture of the suit. The man wore small, circle-framed glasses, and had white hair that was cut like he was in the military, but his posture expressed anything but military. The terminal administrator greeted us with an almost petite warm smile. "Good afternoon," he said with a natural calmness to his voice. "Ticket please," he requested from us. We gave the man our ticket and he put it into his slot in his little booth and we could hear a soft-sounding tone ping from behind his booth. "Thank you," the terminal administrator said as the gate opened allowing us to walk the short bridge that led us to the terminal. "Please follow the instructions and answer the questions the terminal asks and the process will begin shortly." The terminal administrator's voice sounded like a voice that had more than decades worth of public speaking experience. His voice was settled and smooth when he spoke to us. Raisa and I walked into the open pupil-looking part of the terminal. When we were completely inside the terminal, irises moved in a fashion where we were completely enclosed within the terminal. "Please close your eyes," the automated voice from the terminal commanded. Raisa and I looked at each other. We had talked about this the past few days, if we were to go through the process again, where we would want to come out, and what time we wanted our minds to be reset to. Raisa and I each reached a hand out to each other and weaved our fingers together. It's strange how pure that action felt. I closed my eyes. We will be using a brainwave sonar system designed to recognize images, desires, and feelings to accomplish the following needed queries. The automated voice said. "Please turn your head to your right if you understand." I turned my head to my right. "Will the two of you be taken to the same location? Please turn your heads upwards if so, or turn your heads downwards if this is not so." I turned my head upwards. "Both parties will be taken to the same location. To confirm, please open your mouth." I opened my mouth. "Confirmed," the voice stated. "Will both parties be reset to the same mindset? If yes, turn your heads to the right. If no, turn your heads to the left." I turned my head to the right. "Both parties will be reset to the same mindset. To confirm, please open your mouth." I opened my mouth. "Confirmed," the voice stated. "Please imagine the date of which we should reset your mindset to. Please think in terms of the date first, and then the moment," the voice instructed. "When decided, turn your heads upwards, and remember, because of your prior agreements, you must choose the same date and moment." Raisa and I had set aside dates for us to reset to in case we needed to reset multiple times, and this time we had decided to reset to June 10, 2040, 9 in the morning. This was a week before my sister, Facility, was killed. We had practiced imagining the day vividly and clearly. We learned how to focus on the time so perfectly, specifically for the process. I turned my head upwards. A few seconds later an image was broadcast into my mind, just outside our house in the morning time. Is this the appropriate time and place? The voice asked. If yes, open your mouth to confirm. I opened my mouth. Confirmed. The automated voice stated. The memory and body displacement process will now begin. I could feel the air move when the rings and gyros of the terminals moved and spun around us as we stood inside. I didn't dare open my eyes as the space surrounding us was flooded with a bright, blazing light, a color that I couldn't place, but I kept my eyes twisted shut. Even then, the light surrounding us was blinding. I could see the front of our house, Raisa and I's house. I felt a warm feeling in my heart when I turned my head to look at my wife, or the silhouette of her, because of the blinding bright light that still surrounded us. Even the shadow of my beautiful, sweet wife made me happy, and in a few more seconds the wind will die down and we could open our eyes again, and I would be able to see her darling, smiling face. The wind circling us grew stronger and stronger, and the environment of the front of our house became more clear as it came to morning time. The clouds moved like white birds in flocks before the crack of dawn as time was rolling forward to take us to our destination. I squeezed Raisa's hand and she squeezed back. I smiled as the gesture warmed my heart. The wind stopped and I opened my eyes. The suburban scape was so crystal clear, and Raisa was just as beautiful and stunning as ever. I looked into her hazel eyes. I love you, darling Rose. I told her with every passion within me blazing with fire. I kissed her on the forehead before we walked the pathway to our house.
You just finished listening to the intro of my short story, Perfect Forgetfulness. I hope you enjoyed, and tune in next week to hear part 2 of Perfect Forgetfulness. Thank you.